welcome Mika Brzezinski.
Wow, okay, so here we go. This was about as big of an ask as it gets to introduce Anne Finucane at the Matrix Awards. To try and put into words what I feel about Anne, I have to tell you, I've been painting over this for weeks. I have been just stressed out. I'd actually black it out of my mind for long periods of time, and then I would look at the schedule and I'd see that the day is coming closer, and this sickness would sweep over me. It's really hard to describe. Don't get me wrong, this is such an honor, but I'm a little nauseated too. And I started thinking about that, and I realized it's because Anne scares me. She does. So I realized if I'm going to write this and it's going to be from the heart, I needed to sort of look at that, face those feelings, and take a look at why. And I went through some moments of self-reflection and self-awareness, and I kind of had an epiphany. Everyone in this room talks about work-life balance. The struggle not just to lead, but maybe just to get by, hang on while carrying out a life that involves being a wife, a mother, and a working professional. I actually wrote a book a couple years ago about knowing your value, which is, thank you, it's about getting what you're worth in the workplace, getting paid right. And I talk to women a lot about apologizing less, communicating more effectively and elegantly, and I debate in my writings whether or not we actually undermine our own potential and our own accomplishments rather than leverage them into something bigger. Sheryl Sandberg, who's been mentioned a lot here today, similarly wrote Lean In, a manifesto on why women don't lead and what we should do to change that. Sheryl's story, like many of the successful women who have written on this topic, speaks for itself. Mine encompasses years of figuring it out and second-guessing myself, and finally, well into my 40s, knowing my value, but also knowing the value of the many great women around me. And that's when it hit me, the epiphany. All these years, all this time, Anne's just been doing it. She's been quietly, methodically, elegantly doing it. I can't even imagine Anne whining or apologizing, that's not happening, or undermining her true potential, not a bit. She's been quietly executing what we've been writing and blogging and yapping on TV about for years, knowing her value, leaning in, bringing home the bacon, whatever the term of the year. Whether it's chairing the Bank of America Charitable Foundation or guiding the company through multiple successful mergers, Anne has led the charge with a calm, resolute approach that's actually kind of scary when you think about it. You would not think of this woman with 4 kids and 3 more by marriage, and friends like me calling with all their problems. It's not something that you imagine that she balances all, but she does. It's no wonder that Mike Barnacle, her husband of 32 years, calls her, and he's our favorite co-host on Morning Joe, by the way, calls her loyal, insightful, and funny. And the woman who introduced them, Mary Lou Crane, calls Anne fiercely loyal, calm, and my favorite word, unafraid. To many of you here, Anne may be Anne Finucane, Global Strategy and Marketing Officer for the Bank of America. CEO Brian Moynihan says that we all report to Anne, which is a smart move. But what struck me as I got to know Anne is that she sees herself just as much to be Mike's adoring wife, Nick's mom, Colin's mom, Timmy's mom, and Julia Barnacle's mother. Personally, Anne is as fiercely protective, if not more, than she is on the job. By the way, do not crack a joke about Mike like we do on the show, because she will not crack a smile. Her devotion and her loyalty to her family extends to her friends if you're blessed enough to be one. I remember recently I had some personal struggles that were really eating away at me, and it was clear to her and Mike that I was having a hard time. So Anne just called me up on the phone very directly, not to waste any time, and said, "I can help you. So let's get going." She had questions, she listened, she had more questions, and then had answers. The answers walked me through every possibility in my crisis. Analytical, practical, and loving. Those would be the words that I choose to describe Anne. In fact, going through all this helped me work through my little fear problem. And I remember one experience with Anne that kind of debunks it just a tiny bit. I was in her home in Boston about 4 years ago. Joe and I were there. All their kids were there, all their kids' friends. The Red Sox were on TV. Julia, everyone chatting at the same time. It was a marvelous scene, family scene. But Anne was sort of aimlessly walking around the kitchen, looking perplexed and very confused and a little bit lost. And I went in there and I started talking to her, and it turned out she had had her kitchen redone like 6 months ago, but she'd never actually used it. And she was like completely, her state-of-the-art stove was a mystery to her, and I've never seen somebody more perplexed by a blender in my life. But Mike tells me she does cook, tremendous trick with white wine sauce and breadcrumbs, scallops with raspberry sauce. I have to tell you, I'm skeptical. I really am after what I saw. I'm proud to say I'm not afraid of her anymore. I'm simply in awe. Ladies and gentlemen, Anne Finucane.
Thank you, Mika. If I had known you had this much trouble introducing me, I would have just written it myself. And thank you to the New York Women in Communications. Congratulations to all the honorees. It's a privilege to be associated with all of you here, and congratulations to you. A serious word if I can. I live in Boston, or just outside of Boston, with my husband and our family. We have people from Boston that have come here today. Just a special word for our first responders, our firefighters, law enforcement, medical staffs, hospital and volunteers. They were extraordinary, but 4 people were killed, more than 170 were injured, and more than a dozen lost their limbs. So we would ask you to keep them in your hearts, your minds, your thoughts, and your prayers. I'm joined here today by my husband, and it isn't that I really care that other people don't, I don't want other people to make fun of him, because I feel that that's my privilege. But he is here, and we're joined here with friends and many of my colleagues, so thank you all for coming. Like some of the stories you heard today, my own career has been built on a pretty broad tapestry of jobs and management experiences in city government, in television, in advertising, in consulting, and in financial services. For the past several years, I've worked at Bank of America, and I am really truly proud of the company, and particularly privileged to work with such a wonderful group of people. But there is no doubt that the skills and insights I've learned over the last several years have been put to the test as the financial industry has been so increasingly scrutinized. And more on that in a minute. But before all of that, some of what I know today was acquired many years ago, growing up in a large Irish Catholic family and attending the local parochial grade school. A lot was going on. President Kennedy was in the White House. We had the Cuban Missile Crisis, and we believe the nuns were personally working on both saving our souls and fighting the Cold War at the same time. Meanwhile, the boys seemed largely unbothered by all of that, and they were wearing taps on the soles of their shoes, click, 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 tap, 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 heel, toe, down the hallways each and every day, sort of a special homage to James Dean. And then, just as the class was rounding its way from the Rust Belt to the Corn Belt in geography, the sound of the boys' shoes tapping faded for me, and the volume of life around me was turned way down. I had failed then 1, 2, and then a 3rd school hearing test. And for a 6-month period, for reasons doctors never really quite were sure of, I temporarily had lost most of my hearing. For those months, my life was different. The early 1960s were not the late 1960s, so individuality was not found. Its voice yet, standing out was not cool, and trouble hearing was embarrassing. When you're a kid, you just want to fit in. And in the peculiar logic of the nuns, I was now relegated to the back of the room. I guess having established I couldn't hear, they thought I couldn't think either. And back I went, back of the room, last desk, left side of the room. But just before I was sound free, there was a school-wide art contest in which I was one of the winners. And now we were in for the big one, the Archdiocesan Prize, a real badge of honor in the 50s and 60s in the Boston area. So, while my mother kept me up to speed academically at home, at school it was decided I would just work on this art competition. At first I was missing geography, then it was history, then arithmetic, and the last word I remember in French class was cruelly, écoutez, listen. Instead, like a short order cook, I was churning out endless paintings, paintings after paintings, drawings after drawings. And then when the big day came and my painting was displayed, well, it only received an honorable mention, which was equal, essentially, to no mention at all, a failure. Thankfully, my hearing returned. Toward the end of that school year, I was back in the groove of learning and in the middle of the action. No one ever really talked about this, least of all me. But that long ago moment in time has proven to be one of the greatest gifts of my life. I learned some lessons about human nature, including my own, that I would carry with me the rest of my life. First, that listening is not an art, it's a gift. That as brief as my experience was, it's easy to see how someone with a disability can feel invisible, even when they should be given every opportunity to succeed and not cowered by the opinions of others. And finally, sitting in the back of the room, unable to understand what the children or the teachers said, but with a panoramic view of what they did, their expressions and their movements, it gave me an appreciation for those visual cues. The shy smiles, the underhanded poke, the smart girl who bit her nails, the awkward pale boy who would raise his hand first always, but he was just never noticed. And my personal favorite, the eye contact of anger or friendship between two people meant only for the two involved, but observed by that girl in the back of the room who briefly, all those years ago, could not hear right. Those nonverbal cues have proved invaluable in later years and played out on bigger stages with higher stakes in rooms where ad campaigns were designed, where deals were negotiated, and when crises were being managed, lending a certain added dimension to the words, the presentations, the heated exchanges, and the intense negotiations. No matter our professions, I think we all know as we move forward, regardless of where we are in our careers, the world just seems to grow more intense, the issues are more complicated, the stakes are higher, and our successes often heavily depend on those lessons learned, including the setbacks, those moments of insight and enlightenment, no matter how far back they went. Thank you.